The following is an excerpt from a recent meeting of our Us and Them production team.
Recording in progress.
What I'm concerned about today, based on what you said to me, at the end of the conversation, which is the elements that we have already for this program.
Previously, we thought this episode was going to be about COVID was a fire drill for the next pandemic. And what did we learn and what would we change? What would we do? That's what we thought, right? I don't think it's about that anymore. I think I have to scrap what I've started and start over.
Do you think you need anything else?
Well, let me just run this past you guys.
Okay.
So here's the way I see it now. Nobody knows who to trust. Nobody knows what the facts really are. The strongest material and the strongest through line is trust. Yeah, that's what I think we have to do. I think that would be the tightest approach.
I like it.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, you're listening to Us and Them, the show that looks at the things that divide us. I'm Trey Kay. In late February, we put out an episode that we called Moving the Needle. We wanted to look at the effectiveness of public health messaging campaigns designed to increase COVID vaccination rates. The show got some significant listener response, so we decided to make a follow-up program. And while we were working on this follow-up, we were really interested in one listener's email message to us, which offered some constructive criticism to our work. This listener basically said we weren't living up to the Us and Them core mission.
Regarding Trey Kay's show, Us and Them, I tuned in for the first time this week to the program Moving the Needle. I really found the program to be one-sided. I am them, and everyone who got a chance to speak is us. Vaccines are not for everyone. Me, I'm 59 this year, and the recommendation is that I should get vaccinated. Will I? No. Under no circumstances. And I'm someone who usually gets a flu shot every year. I might benefit from the vaccine, but I can't determine that from the one-sided public discussion that is being allowed. I can't even do a Google search on vaccine side effects without getting pages of propaganda links that say, don't worry about the side effects. Real drugs come with disclaimers, all of them. COVID vaccines come with the assertion that the vaccine is safe. One side is allowed to lie, and the other side isn't even allowed to talk. I'll take my chances with this virus. I don't trust the side that is promoting the vaccines.
Recording in progress.
When I look at the DNA of what Us and Them is, it is a program about hearing and listening. And the thing that really got me first about was I felt that he persuaded me to basically say, you're not hearing somebody like me.
Yeah.
We wanted to talk to the author of this letter, who happens to be a scientist. But he wanted to remain anonymous and declined our interview. However, we did have an engaging conversation with him, and he helped us consider some points of view that weren't represented in our previous episode. And that conversation also left us with new questions that we could not ignore. Like, how do we know what's right or wrong here? And ultimately, who should we trust? In fact, that's when we realized that the guest from our earlier program had really led us to this point.
We are experiencing a crisis of trust.
There has been a degradation in trust of public health officials, which some of it's earned and some of it's definitely not.
You see a distrust in institutions everywhere, all across the country.
I do believe that we helped contribute to the problem that we're in right now.
And it's not like the medical community in the United States has, never, both intentionally or otherwise,
By using unkind and non-compassionate messaging.
Made mistakes that have led to the harm of particularly marginalized communities.
I mean, I think the biggest thing that's happened is all the misinformation, all the conspiracy theories.
We fairly lost trust in the public health community.
All the dark news, all that kind of stuff.
People are struggling right now to figure out where to get information that they can rely on.
I mean, there's just so much misinformation that is so readily available.
How do you move somebody from a paradigm where they believe all this stuff to be true that's really not true?
What we need to do is increase trust in public health.
I mean, how do you do that?
Well, we believe one good way to do that is to open ourselves up to a good faith dialogue that includes all points of view. That listener, the scientist who wanted to remain anonymous, he referred us to a colleague who shares similar opinions and concerns about the COVID-19 vaccination. And he was willing to talk with us.
My name is David Collum. I am an organic chemist at Cornell University. I've been there 41 years. In recent years, I've started podcasting and writing about things that started as finance, and then they morphed into politics and geopolitics and COVID and pretty much anything that catches my eye.
David Collum is an outspoken critic of our nation's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Professor Collum says his opinions, while controversial, are based on his own research and analysis of publicly available facts and evidence. What grade would you give our nation's response to the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I would say that it started out fine and ended up an F.
Wow. Connect the dots there on that.
So when it first showed up, it looked scary. It also looked odd to me. Right away, my detector said there's something funny with the story I didn't like. But I said, okay, this looks scary. And then the 14-day lockdown made sense, and then it started to extend, and then it just got long and oppressive. And by the end, they were just making stuff up. They were just inventing it as they went. And I think now that the plot has played out, I think there's some serious grift in the storyline. So, for example, I think we're going to find out in the next 6 months that Pfizer rigged a big chunk of its clinical trial, for example. And I would be okay with all of that because of the urgency if they had told us. But they didn't tell us that. They went into a full propaganda mode. You know, I hate bumper sticker answers to complex questions, and we face them every day, right? Let me tell you the break point for me. As we're rolling through the first year of it, there were things I didn't like about how it was going, but my head wasn't on fire. Where my entire neck snapped was at the moment in which the vaccine had been released and we could say, okay, at least now, Trump's out of office. We will now get to actually ask credible questions about therapeutic treatments and things like that. But they had released the vaccine in December of 2020. And I'm thinking, oh, finally, some relief. Within 1 week, they were telling pregnant women to get vaccinated. They said, I can almost do it verbatim. They said, we have no data yet, but we see no reason why pregnant women shouldn't get vaccinated. And then they said that the sickest part of them all, they said, you could talk to your doctor if you want, but you don't have to. And you would only say that to get people to not talk to their doctors, right? It just doesn't make sense. We tell them to stay away from cat boxes, from smoking, from drinking, from certain foods. But an mRNA vaccine's okay. If they had said, look, getting COVID could be a problem. Getting the vaccine could be a problem. Talk to your doctor. Think about this. Isolating might be a good idea if you're pregnant in the first trimester. But they didn't say that. So that we were 6 months away from the first, what I'll call vaccine baby, which we don't know anything about yet. We were 6 months from the first baby being born who was in a mother who'd gotten vaccinated. 6 months later, we'd get the first example, and the heads of the various medical organizations were saying, you should get vaccinated. You do not have a shred of data to say that. Why are you lying? This is when I realized this is a whole different story. Now, as to why, back to the why, I can go down so many dark rabbit holes to answer that question. I don't have great answers yet. But I go down rabbit holes for a living at this point in my life, and I consider any theory valid until I can shoot it down. I will dismiss nothing at this point because I just see things and go, that does not make sense. It does not make sense. And so this went on, and pretty soon we're double masking, we're triple masking, we're vaccinating children. Explain to me why you vaccinate a child. They don't die. They don't even get sick. Why are we vaccinating children? Someone tell me that.
Collum has concerns about the science and data behind certain claims about the COVID vaccine, how it was created, tested, and rolled out. But he also objects to what he calls an intentional effort to prevent an open and balanced discussion of the issues.
First rule of thumb in my book is the person who's trying to suppress the debate is the liar. We can all handle a debate. Did you turn on any TV shows through the entire event where you had this 5 smart people on Sunday morning who you used to look up to, the Dan Rathers and the type, and they would chew over the week's facts? Did you ever turn on the TV and have them sit around saying, let's talk about whether this vaccine's a good idea or a bad idea? The answer is no. People were being kicked off. The former science writer for the New York Times got kicked off Twitter for tweeting about it. Various doctors were kicked off social media, got fired from their jobs for talking about it. Some of us wanted free and open debate, and others wanted to make sure it never, ever got talked about. You show me an area of science that's political, and I'll show an area of science that's now been destroyed. If I see a person who seems to be weighing all the things, all the variables, and telling me why they got to their conclusion, that's a compelling story. The authorities decided the noble lie was the way to go. And so they decided to stay on narrative, period. So they decided that no matter what, we just keep saying vaccine, vaccine, vaccine. If they had said, here's the pros, here's the cons, here's some of the risks, but that's not what they did. They just completely made it impossible to have that debate. Total loss of credibility. It appears as though they decided that they would tell us what they wanted to tell us no matter what. The First Amendment not only gives them certain protections, but it gives them responsibilities. You guys are fulfilling that responsibility. The rest of them are not, right? If we had these types of discussions, the average person can say, okay, I get it. I get it.
Professor Collum says there's an absence of authoritative information on COVID. He is also confounded by the lack of follow-up on what, to him, seem to be important storylines concerning the virus.
We have no authorities to turn to. If you say, I need the final answer, I need the authority figure, I need the Walter Cronkite, I need the scientist to tell me, I don't have it. I don't have it. I'm so despondent over the scientific. Here's an interesting question. There were 17 virologists who signed a letter in January of 2020 saying that the leak from the Wuhan lab was a conspiracy. The minute they say conspiracy, I go, okay, I shut down. I hate that. I'm a conspiracy theorist. You guys are conspiracy theorists. You're trying to figure out who's conspiring to do something. That's a conspiracy theorist. When someone uses that phrase, they're trying to shut you down by making you feel small and petty. They write this letter. These are 17 prominent virologists who sent us on a wild goose chase for a year before it finally came out. I have emails from February saying, look, I think this came from the lab. A year later, they're telling us it came from the lab. Why aren't those 17 virologists being subpoenaed and asked to testify saying, what do you know?
Recording in progress.
This is it. It's like, how can we trust and what are the facts? That's the story.
Yeah, but a lot of what he was saying was like rehashed versions of like old school conspiracy theories. So what I'm saying is I feel like you can't separate his questioning from some type of politically fueled something.
And that he comes to it with a bias.
Yeah, and that it's not just scientific. He's not just being a scientist.
So the motivation isn't just about science. It's science blended with a political perspective or a worldview or a...
Which I think is completely fair to say for people.
Well, it's how we all are as human beings, right?
Well, right. I mean, like, we don't how many pro-vax people are like MSNBC loving, blue voting and buying the Fauci prayer candles. I mean, my God, like it's a thing. But just feel like I had to add that in the mix too. There's something there.
Professor Collum says he wants to have questions about the virus and the vaccine answered fully. He's offended that people who challenge the science appear to be ignored or written off as conspiracy believers. Collum doesn't just challenge the creation and testing of the vaccine. He also has serious questions about who it's being recommended for, specifically children.
The reason that they shut down therapeutic treatments of COVID, I'll tell you why. To release the vaccine under emergency authorization, one of the legal requirements is there can be no alternative. They had to shut down the alternatives. Now, the second big question, why are they giving it to kids? Giving it to kids is insane. There are no deaths from kids who didn't have leukemia or something like that. There's something like 500 or 600 deaths in the country. Kids are dying from the flu by the thousands every year. So it's insanity to give it to kids, except, and I don't know why this law exists, but there's a law that says that once you go off emergency release, you lose a lot of your tort protection. You lose a lot of your tort protection. So Pfizer becomes exposed unless the vaccine is also for children. And then you retain your tort protection. So guess why they needed to authorize it for children? To retain their tort protection. That's a problem.
Professor Collum's opposition to providing the COVID vaccination for children runs contrary to the standard public health guidance from national and international healthcare professionals. And those are exactly the people who Collum sees as a big part of the problem. At one point in our conversation, he was curious about the other guests that we'd be including in this episode.
Who else have you had? Who else will appear in this?
Brad, do you want to...
Just so you understand, Us and Them is a show which is kind of loosely about the culture wars in America, but it's all sort of framed through the lens of issues that affect West Virginia. So in this particular episode, we'll be speaking with a few individuals, one of whom is the sort of West Virginia COVID czar, Clay Marsh, a woman who is an expert in public health communications from the University of West Virginia.
See, these are all pro. What you just described, they're all part of the establishment, which I'm arguing is corrupt. That's the problem.
Right.
They're paid. They're paid to be that.
Right. I guess you're speculating that they're lying.
Well, I've seen too many lies. I've just seen too many. When the head of a national organization says the vaccine is safe in April of 2021, I don't know how you get there. I don't know how that person can do that without just accepting the lie.
And here is the point where Professor Collum outlines what he believes to be the truth about the COVID vaccine. He says the people in charge of our COVID response have intentionally misled the public about a number of important aspects of disease control.
There have been clinical studies for the last decade saying masks don't work. They've looked at flu epidemics, masks don't work. They've looked at cloth masks. They say they stop nothing. It's like trying to stop the rain with chicken wire. N95 masks supposedly the only ones that stop anything remotely near a virus. After 2 years, Rochelle Walensky, the head of the CDC, comes out and says, oh, by the way, the masks you've been putting on your face for 2 years don't work. She admitted it. And I knew it. Therefore, they knew it. The head of Pfizer did an interview, and he oopsed it. And he said, and I've got the link, he said, we're a little disappointed. The vaccines don't work very well. And the killer was, he said, if at all. And then he said, but the booster will help. I'm going, you're lying. They did a ton of interviews to try to bury the internet with new interviews. So here, my colleagues are told the masks you've been wearing for 2 years don't work. The vaccines don't work. And we know this. It doesn't work if you got to get one every 6 months. That's not a vaccine. That's a treatment. And my colleagues say, well, I better get a booster and a better mask. I'm sitting there thinking, I got to get a gun, right? This is a worldview problem. They are probing how to get us to behave ourselves. That's the big experiment. It's a beta test to get us to follow orders.
As I listened to Professor Collum, a scientist at Cornell University, outline his concerns about the origins of the virus and the efficacy of the vaccine, I realized something important. He and I are a great example of us and them. Some of what Professor Collum says makes me think, yeah, you've got an interesting question there. But I do not believe that public health experts and government officials are lying to us as part of a big experiment. Professor Collum's identity as a scientist has shaped the way he's researched his concerns and how he arrives at his conclusions. Academic credentials can lend some authority to his statements. His comments also made me curious about how someone with such views can maintain a position within academia. So I asked him,
Have you been challenged?
No one at Cornell, nor should they. But don't forget, academic freedom is one of the fundamental tenets of a university. So if they give up that, they've totally lost the plot line. I am a tenured 66-year-old professor at an elite school who professes to support free speech. If I can't speak up and not get fired, it's over. That's why I do.
Recording in progress.
Is our show a forum to determine whether he's done his homework or not, or a place where are we the people who are supposed to check his homework? Is that?
No. I think if I'm reading between the lines right, part of what makes us uncomfortable with this is that smart people disagree.
Yes.
And I think our ability to say, is this smart person smarter than this smart person, is not the point. Really smart people continue to disagree. And some of them suggest to us when they're in their bully pulpit that we should continue to question too, right? And that's where it starts to take on a whole new world of spin and a whole new world of calculation, and sometimes enters social media and sometimes enters politics. But for smart people to suggest to us that there's a lot of stuff we don't know about this virus and about ways to treat this virus seems pretty smart to me right now.
To me, if there was a bias for David Collum, is that all of these problems come from someplace, somebody who is on the take or something like that. A bad actor is basically acting on this situation and making it worse.
Yeah.
And it seemed like every time it was something like that. Okay, I'm going to try to say objectively, that's what I think his bias is. My bias is I don't believe that. And I actually believe that there are people who are actually trying to do things for the good of people, right?
And here we are. This is what the show is about. That's what
we're on the
that's what I
same
was
page,
saying
my
before.
brother. We're on the same page.
Because basically, so what's the answer, right? And the answer is that we have to have some way of moving forward together in good faith.
After a break, we'll hear more about our crisis of trust, including a discussion with a West Virginia specialist in public health communication.
We have a tendency to use our kind of emotional biases to find certain arguments more persuasive than others, even if the arguments that are more persuasive to us are not necessarily what align with the overwhelming majority of science.
And we'll talk with West Virginia's COVID czar, Dr. Clay Marsh.
We're in an environment, a country, where it's about winning. I don't care about winning at all. I care about helping people save their own lives and save my life and save our hospital systems. And however that happens, I'm good with that.
You're listening to Us and Them. This program is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council, the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation.
Music lifts us up and brings us together, even when we can't get together in person. Mountain Stage brings you live performances on the air, online, and in our podcast. They remind you how it feels to be in a live audience listening to live music. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find a link to our stations and our podcast online at mountainstage.org.
Hey there, it's Trey, and from West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX, you're listening to Us and Them. following is an excerpt from a recent meeting of our Us and Them production team.
Recording in progress.
There's bias everywhere. And so how do we know anything, right? And the reason that you can't reach people with any of this messaging is people are just like, hey man, I don't have time to dig into this. I got to do. I got a wife, I got kids, I got a job. This all seems really crazy to me right now. I'm just going to turn it off and step away. And I'll come back later when things seem to have cleared up.
I don't think there is a damn thing wrong with us coming to a place which comes back to the premise that there's still so much that we don't know. And I'm not adult because I don't know.
So, how do we make decisions about something like a vaccine? I've learned from talking to public health officials that people fall into a few camps on this. Some people sign up right away. Some will simply not be moved or convinced, not with data, not with evidence. But then there are others who wait. They wait to see what will happen. They wait because they're skeptical about the information. They wait to learn more. Or they may even wait for someone else to step up first. We wanted to talk with a West Virginian about how they made their decision about the vaccination and the role their family, friends, and community played in their choice. We looked for someone who has been on both sides of this issue.
My name is Jennifer Thacker, and I am the Executive Director here at Good News Mountaineer Garage in Charleston, West Virginia. I am getting over COVID, and I returned to work yesterday, and I was very good about wearing my mask, and today I'm officially what I consider out of jail.
You're out of the doghouse now.
Out of the doghouse, and I can go around people without my KN95.
Were you vaccinated?
I absolutely was vaccinated. I got my first vaccine in August. I chose to get the Pfizer, and then my second dose was in September. And I should be due for my booster soon, but I'm not sure of the exact date.
Jennifer Thacker is part of a group that public policy experts refer to as the movable middle. They start out undecided on an issue, but they can be persuaded to move one way or the other based on the right information, the right circumstances, or a combination of both. Thacker did not rush right out to get a COVID vaccine. What was holding you back?
In my mind, it just hadn't been around long enough to know if there was any long-term effects that would be negative. And I just was hesitant about it. I think that the FDA put it on the fast track, and I don't know that all of the proper protocols and procedures were followed. And I understand why they put it on the fast track. But for me, I wanted to give it a little bit of time to see, what possible effects there were on down the road. And it still really hasn't been around long enough for us to see long-term side effects.
Thacker's ultimate decision to get vaccinated was motivated by the most basic of human responses. It was an act of faith based on love of family. Well, when you chose to get vaccinated, what was it that convinced you to go ahead and do it? I mean, you were hesitant.
Actually, I did not make the decision with my head. I made the decision with my heart. We lost my mother of cancer in 2017 in December. And then in December of 2020, we lost my dad. He had a heart attack, which he had poor health for years. But when it came down to it, I just don't want my sisters to have to bury me too. And if there was anything that I could do to help that to not happen, it was an emotional decision. It wasn't one that I used my head and I considered the science and weighed the pros and cons. I just did it for them. And I can honestly say if my dad hadn't passed away in December of 2020, I would have gotten it sooner because I would have done it to protect him.
You are from Wyoming County. You got the vaccination and you've had COVID and you can live to tell the tale. Would you go back and be somebody who might try to persuade people, this is a good idea?
I absolutely would, because there's a lot of good people there, a lot of people that I'm really close to that I've known my entire life. And if I could talk to them and get them to change their mind, absolutely I would. And maybe they would trust me and, believe my story and why I did it. And I'm so thankful that I got vaccinated, especially when the doctor looked at me and said, "You're positive."
Jennifer Thacker's story is an example of just how personal and how emotional some COVID-related medical decisions can be. Despite the recommendations of public health experts, Thacker's choice to get a vaccination was ultimately a matter of the heart. There are often deep intellectual and emotional forces at play when we make decisions about our health treatment and care options. Julia Faustino specializes in public health and is a professor of strategic communication at West Virginia University.
There are a lot of reasons why you can give people all of the science in the world and they still might not make that decision that would align with what the science is indicating. For instance, in the literature, we have this concept called motivated reasoning, and solution aversion is another piece. So motivated reasoning is the idea that we have a tendency to focus on how we feel and use our kind of emotional biases to find certain arguments more persuasive than others, even if the arguments that are more persuasive to us based on our emotions are not necessarily what align with the overwhelming majority of science. So we're kind of motivated to believe certain things and motivated to disbelieve certain things based on how we feel and how we identify features of our identity. And so if we're feeling like we don't like the idea of having to quarantine or having to wear a mask or having to take some kind of medication into our bodies, we're more likely to find arguments persuasive that aren't advocating for those as the solution. Another thing is psychological reactance. Sometimes if we feel like people, especially in West Virginia, where we're so rugged and so independent and individualized, although also neighborly, psychological reactance is the idea that when we feel like someone is telling us to do something or we feel like someone's trying to persuade us about something, we feel that there's an affront to our independence and we want to try to grab that back. And we'll oftentimes, as human beings, just a natural inclination to grab back that independence, that feeling of independence. We're going to do exactly the opposite of what that person is telling us, just to show them, I'm going to do me. I'm going to do what's right for me. I'm in control of my body. I'm in control of my life. I am the boss of me.
Professor Faustino's reference to the concept of psychological reactance was something I could relate to. When someone tries to convince me about something by overwhelming me with information, I sometimes shut down and am less likely to consider their points. But if we're going to have a meaningful public dialogue, how can we get past this? Faustino believes the answer is in the sort of deep listening that is only made possible with empathy.
Frustration, shame, fear, judgment. Those are all approaches that many people take, and understandably, people are frustrated and they don't understand why certain people are making the decisions that they are. But that's never going to persuade somebody. It's rare that you can come at somebody and make them feel judged and ridiculed and somehow get them to do what you want them to do or what's best for them. If you come at somebody and tell them how horrifically stupid and wrong they are for not doing what you think they should do, you've already lost. It's over. That's not a conversation. That's you venting your feelings at someone, and it's over. We all struggle to just try to find this. What's the message? We just need this message. Surely there's a message out there. And if we just find this message, it'll work. And it's so much more complex than that because we're all human. And we all have our pasts that we use to interpret what we're hearing now. And without understanding and making space for that and having empathy for where each person is at the beginning of that, messages fall short. And empathy, I think, is something that we need. Communication doesn't work without it. It's hard because people get frustrated across the board. The people who want to live their life and are done with this and don't believe that this is an issue anymore. And the people who are still locked down and trying to protect their family as much as possible. All of these people care about themselves and care about their families. All across the vaccine confidence spectrum, you take the 1s to the 7s. Everyone cares about their families. Everyone cares about themselves, and everyone thinks they're doing the right thing. So meeting them where they are and trusting that they have good intentions, which I genuinely believe people do have good intentions and mean well. Finding where they are, why they think the way they do, what is stopping them, what is motivating them, and nurturing them through those conversations in an empathetic way is really, I think, the only way we're truly going to move the needle on this.
In West Virginia, one of the most recognized and respected public health authorities is Dr. Clay Marsh. Marsh has dedicated his life to public health and public service. He's West Virginia University's chief health officer and currently serves as a member of the West Virginia Joint Agency COVID Task Force. Governor Jim Justice appointed him as the state's COVID czar. Marsh acknowledges the avalanche of COVID information and data can present its own set of challenges.
There has been so much information, so many pundits, so many experts. Even for me, who is, I feel like I'm pretty sophisticated with a lot of this literature, it is just confusing. When you hear the CDC and you hear the FDA, and it's just so many voices. And because our news cycle is 24/7, and because we have a slew of experts, it's like the celebrity chefs on the Food Network. We now have the celebrity COVID experts, who are circulating, doing their thing on different networks. And everybody wants to say something that's new or newsworthy. And it is just overwhelming. So I think that at this point, we have confused our audience, whereas when I look at the data, it's really simple. Get your shots, get your booster, wear your mask, be careful. This is going to pass, and let's pass with an intact hospital system and a population that is going to have as few deaths as possible.
Marsh says the pandemic presents us with an overload of information, misinformation, and media noise. As a result, it's played into existing divisions. COVID has held a mirror up to the fractured state of our nation.
But when you start to talk to people, it's really complicated. You got a group of people that, for a variety of reasons, are just like, nope, we don't want to take the vaccine. That may be 15% of the people, maybe 20%, I don't know. Then there's a big group in the middle that, are concerned, have heard some stuff that they didn't like some younger people were worried because there was an initial rumor about sterility in women, which has proven to be not correct. The issue about pregnancy and is it safe? And it turns out that COVID reduces your ability to become pregnant. If you're a man, you have an 18% reduced ability to have your semen work well if you've had COVID within 60 days. Vaccination protects that, and vaccination has no impact on pregnancy. And in fact, it protects pregnant women because COVID infection in pregnancy induces premature labor and all sorts of bad things to happen. So vaccine absolutely good and effective for that. But I think for a lot of people, because of all of the different noise and information that is just overwhelming and confusing, there's a big group in the middle, maybe like 40, 50% of people in the middle who've been, at varying times, it's not convenient enough, I didn't get time off work, etc. So trying to reduce the resistance to that. And then there's a group of people that, absolutely run to get the vaccines and boosts and all that. So I think that although there are certainly differences that have been reproduced in several studies related to how you voted or what kind of rural versus urban place you live, I think it's too simple to say it's just partisan in politics. It's a lot of it's a social network. It's the state of our country. I think that there is a lot of distrust in the government today, more than back in the day when ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And I think we're seeing a lot of that playing out during this pandemic. So I think the pandemic and the response is a reflection of our time, not just a reflection of the pandemic.
As Dr. Marsh sees it, the discussion about COVID vaccinations is no longer just about public health. The conversation now includes some people who are motivated by conspiracy theories and concerns over the potential loss of individual rights. Marsh says this threatens our ability to end the pandemic.
And if you think about from just a sanity standpoint, like why wouldn't we do things to stay alive if they're pretty easy to do? I mean, generally, we take other vaccines, Now, I know people were freaked about rumors about sterility for women, which aren't true, and pregnancy, not true, blah, blah, blah. But once you don't believe, then you don't believe, and you can say all you want, like, here's the real skinny, but somebody else could go, well, he's in the pocket of the pharma companies, he's trying to do something nefarious to put a computer, people actually believe
computer chip in your mind.
Computer chip in people, or that we were spreading COVID by giving the vaccines. But I think for a lot of people, this is not it's not even about COVID anymore. It's really about your rights and your privileges, and the fact that people don't want to be told what to do. Kind of like the seatbelt laws, the indoor smoking laws. People said, it's my right to do what I want to do. The problem to me, the tragedy, and I'm all for personal rights, it's fine. But the thing is, this pandemic right now has a risk of continuing to go on if we don't get enough people vaccinated and immune against these viruses. They will continue to mutate. We'll find different and more capable variants that will either infect us faster or make us more sick. And we need to get enough people that act as firewalls to stop the global spread of this virus. And right now, although we like to think that this may be the start of the end, more people immune, the Omicron variant not as severe, more people getting infected, and we'll have some at least short-term immunity, that maybe this is the sort of this exit song, and maybe it is. But I would say every time we've said that before, we have been absolutely wrong. The other big problem we have is because of the way our country's put together, et cetera, we think that if we just put enough money behind something, we'll fix it. We'll overcome it, whether it's nature or whatever. We'll just take care of it. We'll either put the right people in the room, or we'll, and this is not that kind of thing. And in fact, that kind of thinking has been part of the problem here, because it's not about beating this. It's not about defeating it. It's not about going to war with COVID. It's about dancing with COVID. It's about living with COVID. It's about understanding that we got to get stronger. It's not going to get weaker.
Marsh sees the pandemic as a watershed point for our society. He says to make it through successfully, unity is the key.
This is not a black swan event. This is a white swan event because it's been predictable. And this has caused huge amounts of stress on a country and a world that is very polarized, where, the information media sources vying for attention, for followers, social media channels, where we had one of the most unconventional presidents in the history of the United States. I mean, so there's just so many things that were all added up at this time, and this time of really monumental change. I mean, if you look at the weather patterns, the political standards, and books about are we close to another civil war, etc. We could not be more polarized in many ways than right now. And this pandemic, to me, is also part of this great change. I think we're at a moment of transformational change. And I think a lot of the definition of the future is going to be based on what happens here. And I believe this wholeheartedly with the governor. Whether we vaccinate people, whether there's other variants of COVID, the key for us is we can't lose a more non-fractured community that's not at war with each other. In West Virginia, that would be catastrophic, and he's doing his best to keep that part together. And that, I believe, when you come down to the real core, what are your most principal needs? And that would be one of them. Because once you start to go to war with each other, then that's where you start to see everything fall apart. Ultimately, we'll help all that we can. And the people that don't choose to be vaccinated, if they get sick, we'll take care of them too. And, you're still a West Virginia person. And so we want everybody to get through this and be healthy.
Dr. Marsh says to preserve unity, it's important to avoid vaccination mandates. He believes that would create the very kind of psychological reactance or adverse responses that Dr. Frostino talked about earlier.
If we try to compel people to get vaccinated, it's very likely to cause a very big group of unvaccinated people to retrench and to resist. And what we don't want to do, and I think what the governor's done really, really well, is we have not fractured down the middle. We haven't had people with automatic weapons on the mansion lawn or on the Capitol lawn, and like we saw in Michigan and some other states.
But Marsh says in the absence of public health mandates, people must voluntarily embrace the changes needed to stop the virus.
We're losing 2,000 people a day. We had 1 million new cases in children last week, which is 1 out of every 10 cases in the entire pandemic happened last week in our country. And nobody seems to be batting much of an eye about it. And I think that, we're at a time of monumental change. And I think ascribed to Darwin, but not said by Darwin, was that it's not the most intelligent or the strongest of the species that survives. It's the one that's the most adaptable to change. And I think that's been the biggest challenge we've had during COVID. Nobody can really change. And although we say that we're adapting, we really want a pill to take. We're waiting for, the new deworming agent that comes out that people want to take, whatever. But we want the quick fix. We're not really willing to change and to learn and to grow and to adapt. Certainly the virus has. So the real mismatch to me is its ability to change and our inability to change.
Clay Marsh is a realist, and he recognizes that government initiatives have a limited ability to shape our personal health choices. But he believes that even small victories justify the effort, a view he illustrates with a brief story.
A child's walking down the beach early in the morning and sees that there's just been a huge number of starfish that have washed up on the beach, and understanding that the starfish would die out of the ocean starts to throw the starfish back in one by one. An adult walks by and sees the number of starfish and understands the inability of that child to get, even a small number of this huge number of starfish back in the water, laughed at the child and said, "You're wasting your time. You should just leave it alone. You'll never get to all those starfish back in the water." And the child looks back and says, "You may be right, but for the ones that I do, it'll make a great difference."
Some of where you end up on the question of COVID vaccinations depends on where you begin. That became much more evident to me after I talked with Cornell scientist Professor David Collum. He doesn't trust government vaccination efforts.
Recording in progress.
What we really need is to believe that, and I guess this is a problem with Colum, he doesn't believe. Like, he doesn't believe that government institutions are acting in good faith. He believes there's an agenda. But I mean, that's what it comes down to, is like,
and I don't.
We have to fight, and you don't. Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't. You're a person who believes that the government does act in our interest and in good faith.
More or less.
More or less.
I somehow feel like we're getting to a conclusion.
Recording stopped.
As a final thought, Dr. Marsh left us with this. Although COVID has become another battlefield in the culture wars, there are actually no points to be scored, no battles to be won here. Our collective survival is the only objective.
We're in an environment, a country, where it's about winning. It's about, being more popular. And this is not about winning. This is about surviving and then thriving. So to me, I don't care about winning at all. I care about helping people save their own lives and save my life and save our hospital systems. And however that happens, I'm good with that.
So maybe it's just that simple. Let's try really listening. Let's trust each other to act in good faith. And then let's see about winning. Together. You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode is me, Trey Kay, Brad Stratton, and Kate Smith. Special thanks to our colleague, Christina Stella. Michael Lipton and Tristan Lozow wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Greater Kanawha Valley Foundation, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. This program is made possible by funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 through the West Virginia Humanities Council. Any findings, conclusions, or recommendations do not necessarily represent those of the West Virginia Humanities Council or the National Endowment for the Humanities. Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the Mentorship Program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We trust that we'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.